Now, I know I said I was done with Riley Sager. Yes, I did. But I also said if I started to hear good things about his next book, I might pick it up. And that is what happened. That is what I did. And here we are. Do I regret it? You'll just have to come right back and find out. Hello, hello, hello. My name is Nakia. Welcome to my channel. So yes, the time has come. We have a new Riley Sager release and I picked it up. Yes, I did. It was unexpected, believe you me. But as promised, we are here for a spoiler review. You can find out all the twists and turns that happen in this book. I'm going to give a very brief spoiler-free portion first and then give you time to exit right, left, whichever way you want to go. And then I'm going to get into all the good stuff that you came here for. So without further ado, let's just get right on into this book review. Did not mean to rhyme that, but I don't know what else to say. So in the newest release, The Only One Left by Riley Sager, we follow a young lady named Kit who is a caregiver, and she is recently assigned to care for a woman named Lenora who is shut away in her home that is high up on a cliff away from society. This home was her family home where it was also the scene of 3 grisly murders. Her father, mother, and sister were all killed and she was accused of the murders, but there was not enough evidence to convict her, so she was found not guilty. And since then, everyone is still convinced that she is a murderer. And she's been shut away in her house because she can't really go anywhere. It's a small town. And again, who wants to be walking around with everyone thinking you're a murderer? Another tidbit about Lenora is that she has had some strokes and other health conditions that have left her paralyzed and unable to speak, and she only has the use of her left hand. Now, when Kit goes to work for her, Lenora has a typewriter, and Kit decides that she can use this typewriter to communicate with Lenora. And Lenora also decides it is time to tell Kit her story of what really happened the night of those murders. So that is what we have in this story. Now, I will just give a quick spoiler-free portion because we're not going to get too deep. I'm going to save my rating for the end. You're going to have to check the end to find out what I think about this book. But the reason I picked this up is because this one had a very gothic feel. And if you don't know, I love gothic stories. I mean, not old classic ones, but I just love modern gothic tales. And this had those vibes. I read a little bit of a sample when I started hearing people speak highly of this book, and I was just into the vibes from the very beginning. Pacing was pretty good. I'd say medium pace. Of course, when you get to the middle, to the end, it gets very fast paced, but chapters are pretty long. They get shorter, of course, the further you go and the more things pick up. But I did not have a problem struggling through any of the chapters, even if they were a little bit longer. I did not have an issue with this. I also did this in tandem with the audiobook. I did not care for the main narrator for Kit, but I loved the narrator for Lenora. So whenever I would get to the typed portions that were from Lenora's POV, I would always switch to the audiobook. And I mean, I do not regret that. I would recommend it. You may like the narrator who did Kit's voice and be able to do the whole thing with the audiobook, but again, I just like the portions from Lenora's POV. Characters were on point. I've said this before, but I cannot read a book if I don't like a main character. That is a quick way to a DNF. If you don't know, you're new here, I DNF quite often, quite easily, quickly, all of that. So yeah, if I don't like the characters, we're done here. And I liked Kit. She's the main one we're following. I got on board with her from the beginning, so I did not have any issues with that. I think all the characters were pretty well written. Now, unfortunately, that's about all I want to say right now because I don't want to talk about twists and turns until I get into the spoiler portion of the video. But you can skip ahead to the timestamp here to find out my final thoughts and my final rating. But other than that, we're going to jump right into the spoiler review for this book. Okay, so like I said, we start the story with Kit, and we find out in the very beginning that she has been on suspension for being suspected of being involved with a patient's death. She says she's innocent. The whole story was that she had a patient who was really, really terminally sick, and she had some pills. I don't remember the name of them. If I feel like looking it up, I will put it here on the screen. Yes, I could flip through here, but I don't remember where that part is. So anyway, she had these pills, and the patient was supposed to get 1 pill, but she accidentally left the bottle out, and the patient took all the pills and died. So of course, everyone believes she left the pills out on purpose. She says she didn't. Again, there was an investigation. She was found not guilty, similar to Lenora, and she was able to return to work. But the man that she works for, his name is Mr. Gurlane. He sends her on an assignment that's pretty much like one no one wants. And it's like, look, you're lucky you still got a job. you do this assignment or you can find another place to work. And, you know, she doesn't have the best reputation. These accusations made it into the local newspaper. And so she's like, fine, I'll take this assignment. And it happens to be being a caregiver for Lenora Hope. And again, everyone in this town knows about the rumors. She's supposed to be like Lizzie Borden, if you know that story, that true crime story. But yeah, so she's pretty famous, infamous, and Kit is like, all right, I don't really have a choice. We also find out that Kit is kind of estranged from her father. She lives with him, but for some reason, he's not really speaking to her. He's like sitting in front of the TV, don't really pay her any mind. And she's just like, whatever, I'm ready to get out of here anyway. So she packs up her bags and heads to Hope's Inn to work for Lenora Hope. Now, when we get to Hope's Inn with Kit, she is greeted by a woman named Mrs. Baker, an older woman who is around Lenora's age. She has been there since Lenora's been there, and she is the main caretaker for the home. So she's the one who gives her the lay of the land, gives her the tour and everything, shows her room, all that stuff. One thing we find out when she gets this tour is that, number one, there's still bits and things left over from the crime scene, which is gross. There's like a blood stain on the steps that are going up to the second floor. There's blood stains in the billiards room where the father was killed. The blood stains on the steps are where the mother was killed. And there's a chandelier that's a little bit crooked because that is where Lenora's sister was hanging. And so all this stuff is just unsettling. And to top it off, when they start ascending further up into the house, Kit notices she starts feeling a little bit weird. And Mrs. Baker tells her that, like, yeah, you're not imagining things. The house is a little bit crooked. It's starting to slide off this cliff a little bit. So that doesn't sit too well with Kit, but she starts to get used to it as, you know, she starts to work there a little bit longer. But that's important. Gonna come and play later on. Now, of course, there's the whole meet and greet with Lenora. Again, we already know she's bedridden. She can't talk or anything. And Kit is kind of like, I don't know. I probably prefer this. She does her regular duties, you know, bathing her, all that stuff, which is like, I can't imagine, but she's used to it. She just feels a little uncomfortable because it's Lenora Hope and she still thinks she's a murderer. So as I mentioned in the very beginning, Lenora has this typewriter and Kit sees it and is like, oh, this is another way I can communicate with her. Because earlier when she's given the tour, Mrs. Baker tells her that Lenora has one way she can communicate. She knocks twice for yes and once for no. So she'll tap on anything that's near her. So that works a bit, but then Kit starts to have questions that she needs, you know, a little bit more than a yes or no for. And so that's when she takes the typewriter over to Lenora and she can now type her some sentences. And then that is when Lenora types up, I want to tell you everything, her story. And then we get another timeline, which Riley Sager is known for, where we get Lenora's side of the story. And we just get a little background on her as a 17-year-old child, what her home life was like, living with her rich tyrant of a dad. He's just not the nicest person. He was sleeping with the help. Her mom is shut away in her room, getting high on laudanum, which is something they used back in those days. This is the 1920s. So that's how things were. And then there's a lot of staff members. We also find out there's some staff members there who are important to the story, Miss Baker and Archie. Archie's the chef and Miss Baker is like, again, like kind of in charge of everything in the house. The other thing about this story is that the reason Kit is now being hired for this job is because the other caregiver who was working for Lenora has suddenly vanished. She just disappeared in the middle of the night. Her name was Mary. No one knows what happened to her. Now I'm gonna tell you right now, when I was reading, I was like, she disappeared in the middle of the night. That sounds weird. And then a little bit later, we got a little more interesting information, like she left all her clothes, her books, her medical bag with all her stuff in it. And so I was like, she ain't disappeared. Somebody killed that child. Of course, I was right. Spoiler alert. Another twist we find out that the patient that Kit was caring for that caused her suspension was her own mother. Her mother was sick with cancer and Kit asked the healthcare service that she was working for if she could care for her mother. They agreed. I don't know why. It seems like that'd be a, conflict of interest, but they let her do it. And she was able to let her mother stay home because, that's where she was comfortable. So the whole thing with the pills, her leaving out the pills, was her mom. So then, of course, it's like, did she do it on purpose? Because if her mom was suffering, that gives her more reason to leave the pills out. That is what I thought. That is what I was going with through the whole story. Now, another thing Riley Sager likes to do is sprinkle some little bit of paranormal stuff here and there, or you will think there's some paranormal goings-ons in the story, and there was no exception with this book. Kit starts noticing some strange things while she's working there and caring for Lenora. For one, she's out on her patio, terrace, whatever you want to call it. It has a little low railing or whatever, and while she's out on her patio one day, she notices she can see across to Lenora's room, and she sees a figure go past the room, and she's like, who is in her room? The next day, she goes to Lenora and asks her who was here. Was someone in your room? And Lenora types on the typewriter, my sister, the dead sister. So of course we're supposed to think there's a ghost. Meanwhile, there was a seance, which I was so here for. There is a young lady working in the house. Her name is Jessie, and she's like in her early 20s. She's a little like wild child, you know, with colored hair, all that kind of stuff. This book takes place in like the late 80s, early 90s. So back then that was like a little bit, you know, out there. It's normal now. But anyway, she's like a little bit out there, a little bit eccentric. So it's Jessie that suggests they do a seance to try to figure out who is in Lenora's room, what's going on in this house. They do the seance. It ends up being that Jessie was messing around, playing around. She was moving the planchette and all that. I was a little bit disappointed because I thought we were getting some ghost goings-ons. But anyway, there was nothing there. Now, they're also supposed to be an oddly handsome groundskeeper. I don't know what oddly handsome means. I couldn't picture it. But hey, this is what Kit thought. Now, when she starts talking to him, they end up discussing some things and getting into, you know, conversations about the house and whatnot. And she finds out that Carter was friends with Mary, the one who disappeared, the former caregiver. And we find out that Lenora was telling her story to Mary first. And it's like what happened to all the pages of the story that she was already telling her, because she's starting fresh with Kit. And then Carter tells her that he and Mary suspected that he could be Lenora's grandchild, because there was supposed to be a baby that was left on a church doorstep or something. He believed that could be Lenora's baby and that could be his grandfather. Now, we do find out in flashbacks that Lenora was indeed pregnant when she was a 17-year-old. She got pregnant by a guy who was working in the house named Ricky, and she tried to hide this pregnancy from her family. They just started thinking she was just getting fat, which, you know, okay. The people who were working in the house, she had some of the ladies just letting her dresses out. They were giving her the side eye like, And so, yeah, that's another interesting piece to the story, because now we have a baby that came into play, and it could give her a motive for what happened. Because again, Kit is getting bits and pieces of this story, and her whole thing is trying to figure out what happened the night of the murders that caused Lenora to kill her family. Now, back in the 20s, when we get back to Lenora's story, we found out a little bit more about her nasty dad. Like I said, he was sleeping with all these women in the house, the maids and whatnot. And we also find out that he got some of these women pregnant, and he was paying them off to have abortions. I mean, and then there is also a moment where we find out that Lenora is not her father's child, that her mom was also sleeping with someone who worked in the house. I mean, what was going on in this family? And that she actually was in love with him, but because he was like, you know, the help, they paid him off to keep his mouth shut. He left. And so because they paid this guy off, everyone just believed that Lenora's dad, the one who raised her, was her father, but he indeed is not. So this means Lenora and her sister Virginia have two separate dads. I'm sorry, I don't think I mentioned her sister's name, Virginia. So because Lenora was trying to hide this pregnancy from her family, especially her father, she had to find a way to get some medical care for herself and her unborn child. Also, she needed more food because her father thought she was fat. He put her on a diet and was like trying to give her just salads, and she needed more than that for her baby. So she's like, who can I get to help me who will keep their mouths shut? And then she realizes she can get one of her father's whores. So one day she is outside one of the rooms in the house, I don't remember which one, and she hears her father in there getting down with one of his mistresses. She waits outside for this woman to come out so she can approach her. And when the door opens, another twist, it's Miss Baker. And she's like, you, Miss Baker? And Miss Baker's like, yes, me. I was like, oh, Miss Baker, Miss Baker. She was not one to be messed with. She did not care. She told her, look, you don't know what it's like for women like me. I got to do what I got to do. Your father gives me money. He helps me out. So mind your business. A scandalous. So Kit is like, I need your help. I'll keep your secret. You can help me with mine. She tells her she's pregnant, and Miss Baker agrees to help her. As I said earlier, because this baby is in the situation, that kind of gives Lenora a motive, because Kit asked Lenora what happened to the baby, and Lenora says they took him. So of course, we already know Carter told her there was a baby left on the doorstep of a church. So Kit thinks they took her baby and just left that baby out somewhere. And now that gives Lenora a motive, because Kit is thinking if the family is the one who took this baby away, that gives her motive to kill them. Okay, so flashback to the 1920s. Lenora and Ricky have made a plan to run away together, and you know, they decide it is going to be this night, which happens to be the night of the murder. So we starting to get to what really happened. It's the meat and potatoes, what you here for. So the night that they're going to run away, Lenora's sister comes in and catches her like, what you think you're doing? You ain't going nowhere. And she's like, you are not going to bring shame to this family. So she locks Lenora in her room. And of course, Lenora is like screaming and hollering and upset and like, let me out. And her water breaks. She goes into labor. So poor Lenora ends up having this baby by herself in the room. And then as soon as the baby comes out, In comes her dad and Miss Baker and her sister. They cut the cord and dad is like, take that baby away. And she is screaming and crying and like, please give me my baby back. This just broke my heart. As a mom, I just cannot imagine. Lord. Again, I say I was listening to the audiobook for this portion because it was Lenora's part, and the way the audiobook narrator did it, she kind of just went into like a little kid's voice, and it just broke me. I had to get myself together. So anyway, he is like, you're not gonna bring shame on this family. He's like, you lucky I don't throw it off the balcony. I was like, oh my God. I just could not believe him. At that point, I was like, he deserves to die. Whatever happened to him, I don't feel bad. I want to know, but I don't feel bad. So it ends up being that Miss Baker is the one to take the baby away. Virginia tells her to go take the baby someplace and she'll arrange for them to be reunited later. So then, this is when we find out what really went down. A little bit later, Lenora and Virginia's mom brings herself out the room. With her, she has a knife, and we know that this was the murder weapon for 2 of the 3 murders. So she goes to go talk to her husband, and she's like, look, I have had enough of you. This is it. Meanwhile, Lenora has dragged herself out of bed because she, is like, I want my baby. She hears commotion. She goes into the office and her mom is like, look, you need to leave. I'm talking to your father. So she leaves. So her and Ricky are together in the hallway and Lenora's mom reemerges. She has blood on her and she has stabbed her husband, their father, and is like, whoa. So I did not see that coming. I did not think she was going to be the one who had killed him. I think at the point when she came down with the knife, I was like, wait, oh, okay. But I didn't think that was going to be it until it was revealed. So the blood that is on her is because she tried to kill herself. And so once again, wasn't expecting that, but she was not successful. So she starts like climbing up the steps, which is how we get the blood that was on the steps. And she asked Ricky, the father of Lenora's baby, to help her end it. Because she's like, I'm going to die. I'm suffering. I need you to help me with this. And he's like, I can't do this. Meanwhile, Lenora is like, please don't do this. And then the mom starts saying all this horrible stuff to him about how you're no good and you're worthless and all this stuff. And she hits that right button. And the next thing, he stabs her. And so he's the one that killed her. Should have known there would be more than one person involved with this. It was just not going to be Lenora like we thought. It ended up being more than one person. Now, brace yourself for another reveal. Back in the present, Kit is in the house and she's looking at these family portraits that are on the wall. They're all individual pictures of the father, the mother, Virginia, Lenora. Looking at the picture, she remembers what this woman Bernice told her. Now, Bernice worked in the house and she was the wife of Ricky. And Bernice found out about this affair and she started blackmailing the family. That's another side story. We don't need to get too deep into that. But just know she's in an old folks home. Kit went to go visit her to find out her side of the story. And she's like, yes, I knew that child was a trollop. And she says, I knew my husband was a goner when he looked into her big blue eyes. And then Kit realizes Lenora that she's been caring for does not have blue eyes. I think she has green eyes. I'm pretty sure. So she saunters into the kitchen where Mrs. Baker is sitting having some wine because she got a drinking problem. And she says, yeah, Lenora, I just checked on Virginia. She's doing fine. And Mrs. Baker's like, I don't know what you're talking about. She's like, yes, you do. You're Lenora and that's Virginia in the bed. And then she finally is like, I'll tell you everything. So biggest plot twist of the book. Now, I will say, when I was reading this, I was like, there has been a switch somewhere. I just felt like it because the woman that we thought was Lenora could not speak. And so I'm like, we don't know if she's who she's supposed to be. All this stuff happened back in the day and she can't talk. So how do we know she's actually Lenora? I thought Mrs. Baker was Virginia, the sister, but I had no idea that the Lenora that was in the bed was actually Virginia and that Mrs. Baker was Lenora. I just thought Mrs. Baker was her sister. So yes, we flash back to the 1920s and we find out Virginia is telling Kit all of this. But we find out that the night of the murders, like I said, after the mom and dad had been murdered, Virginia, not Lenora, is just like, I don't have anything left to live for. They took her baby. Now her mom and dad are dead. So she's just like, I don't care. I want to end it. So she takes the knife, the murder weapon, and throws it into the sea, which that was the whole thing. There was no murder weapon. They never found it because she threw it into the sea and then she proceeds to hang herself to end her life. But the rope or whatever was not that secure. She did hang for a bit, which is when her sister Lenora enters the picture and she finds her there. So yes, a doctor came and everything and police and all this stuff. So the investigation proceeds and all of that. Meanwhile, Lenora, formerly Mrs. Baker, decides that she just wants to have a life. She doesn't want any part of all of this. She knows that no matter what the outcome, the police and everybody are going to believe that her or her sister are responsible for these murders and they will have no life. But she's like, it ain't going to be me today. So she bribes the doctor to say that her sister died, and he does. All it took was a car. I don't believe there was any money. I just think she gave him one of her dad's cars, and he declares her sister dead. And that is when she becomes Miss Baker. Because again, remember, Miss Baker took Virginia's baby, formerly Lenora. She took Virginia's baby and took off with the baby. So she's gone out the picture. So she becomes Miss Baker, but she ended up changing it to Mrs. Baker. That was a sign right there when I was reading. I was like, wait, why are we getting Mrs. Baker in the present, but it's Miss Baker, M-I-S-S, in the past, because they're two separate people. So anyway, she becomes Mrs. Baker and she starts calling her sister Virginia Lenora. She's like, you're Lenora. That is that. Her sister, is just laying there because, again, she's recovering from this attempted suicide. And so she decides to go gallivanting in Europe and live her best life while her sister is bedridden. She leaves her with a caregiver, which is when all these caregivers start coming and going throughout the years. And then there is the chef, Archie, who is still there as well. Now, because this doctor declared Virginia dead, Lenora inherited all the money, and this is what she was doing in Europe. But then she ended up getting to a point, there was a war. I'm not sure which war because of the time period, but there was a war and her money started to get a little low. She was also upkeeping Hope's Inn. So she comes back and then she's now taking care of her sister and the house with the caregiver, whoever is the one at the time. Then comes another plot twist. So Kit finds out from Archie, the chef, that Ricky, the Ricky that we had been following in this story, or so we thought, was gay. The husband of Bernice, the one Bernice who was blackmailing the family because she knew about this affair. And also the night of the murder, she was the last one to see Virginia with a knife. And also she had this evidence that, her husband was having an affair. So she was like, I'm a tell. But what she didn't know was her husband wasn't sleeping with her. He was sleeping with Archie. He was gay. And so every time he was sneaking off with Archie, the chef. So then the question was, who is Ricky, the father of Virginia's baby? So at this point, Kit has had enough. She's like, I'm out of here. I'm sick of all these secrets and lies. Everybody's been lying to me. Virginia, you were not Lenora and you're not telling me everything. I had to find out through your sister Virginia. I'm just done. So she gets in her car and she goes home to her father. When she gets to her house, her father's not there. But what is there is a suitcase, and inside the suitcase are the pages of Lenora's book and a vial of blood, because we found out that Mary drew blood from Virginia when she found out that she had this baby that was out there somewhere and she wanted to find this baby. And also Carter suspected this was his grandfather. So Kit is like, what is my father doing with this? And then she has an epiphany. Her father's name is Patrick, but everybody called him Pat. And then she realizes she never thought about people giving him a nickname for the second part of his name, Rick. So he is the Ricky, the father of Virginia's baby. I did not see that coming at all. This book has to have the most plot twists of any Riley Sager book. There are just so many. It is hard to even keep them straight for this video. It's a struggle. So then Kit gets in her car and she drives back to Hope's Inn. She finds her father trying to choke poor Virginia. Woo, Lord, just so much. I am speeding through. There is just so much to this that I am not able to get to, because otherwise this video will be 5 hours long and we're not doing that today. So when Kit walks in the room and finds her dad choking, Virginia's like, what are you doing? Then that's when she's like, I'm sorry, what happened with mom? It was my fault. And he's like, no, I shouldn't have let you think that. And she's like, what are you talking about? And then he reveals another goddamn plot twist, another one. He reveals that he's the one who assisted her mother with the suicide. How could you? Yeah, it turns out Kit did leave out the pills, but that he went in the room and gave the pills to her mom, and they agreed together that she was going to end her life. And they did not tell her, didn't give her a chance to say goodbye or nothing. And he let her go through this investigation and everything and never said anything. So the whole reason why he wasn't talking to her is because he felt guilty. He couldn't look her in the eye. She was thinking he blamed her for the mom's murder, but it was because he was the one who knew what happened and wasn't saying anything. His whole thing was like, if it had gotten to where you got arrested, I would have said something. What? Okay. But you let people still think she was a murderer. Okay. All right. There ends up being a tussle. There was a part earlier in the story where Kit was talking to Mrs. Baker in the kitchen. She took her corkscrew and put it in her pocket because she was like, I don't know what you're going to do when I approach you about knowing you're actually Lenora and not Mrs. Baker. And so she has this corkscrew in her pocket. When she gets in the room with Virginia and her dad, she puts the corkscrew down. Virginia gets that corkscrew with her one good hand. She stabs Patrick with it. Then in comes Lenora with a shotgun. Then Lenora and Patrick tussle. And then she ends up falling down the steps. action scene. Then all of a sudden, the house starts rumbling and everything. And guess what? Yes, this house is finally gonna fall off this cliff. So then everybody has to get the hell out. But we got poor Virginia, who is bedridden. So Kit is like, I need to get her out of here. Her father's like, we don't have time. And you can't do this by yourself. She's like, I can do it if you help me. So the two of them carry her out the house. And then damn Lenora sits her butt down on the step and is like, I'm not going anywhere. She decides to go down with the ship. I was like, what the hell? Anyway, they left her because they like, we ain't got time for this. They run out the house. Everybody's okay. But then Kit's dad decides to go back in the house because he's like, I'm sorry for everything I did. I guess the guilt and everything. He knows their relationship is just a mess and he goes back in the house. So then Lenora and Patrick, Kit's dad, die in the house. The house finally crumbles apart and falls into the sea or whatever. And that is the end of those two. So then we end the story with Kit taking care of Virginia in her home. She decides to stay there where she lived with her mother and her father. She gives Virginia her bedroom and she is now in her parents' room. And at the very end of the story, we find out that Virginia is discovering all these new things. She's, got a boombox. She's listening to music. She's watching TV. She's so fascinated with it because she's never had TV before. And then there's a scene where Kit is like, you all right? I'm going to go take a shower. And she, waves her away with her one good hand like, you can go. I'm good. And so Kit goes take her shower. She comes out the shower and she's like, Virginia, I was just thinking that. And she looks and Virginia is gone. Now, when I got to this part, I was like, okay, she's probably on the ground. She passed out or something. She's, she's old. She's probably dead, but she fell out the wheelchair. No, Kit walks over and finds a note that is left on the table. And I have to read to you what this note said because my mouth was left hanging open. This is what the note said. At 69, Virginia Hope wrote her nurse this little note. Thank you, dear, for saving me. Now it's time to let you be. I take my leave, walking tall, knowing that I fooled them all. I was like, what? What? I had to go back and read the part where she says she was gone. I was like, gone? She left. So this is what is so funny. There was a part in the book where Kit thought Lenora could be faking it because there were some things like she noticed the Walkman that Lenora was listening to would stop. And the whole thing was that Jessie, the maid who was working in the house, she was recording audiobooks for her. She was recording stories for her to listen to so she could have some entertainment. And one time, one of the tapes had just stopped. It was in the middle and she was like, how'd that happen? And she just knew Lenora could move. But she did all these tests on her because, she's a caregiver. And she discovered like, okay, she can't move. I don't know. I'm tripping. Come to find out she can move and talk. So then we later get a letter that Virginia sends to Kit. And it basically tells her that after the hanging and she was in the bed, she was not paralyzed then, but she thinks something psychological was wrong with her, that she just couldn't move or anything. And also she feels like she just didn't have the will to do anything because she didn't have her baby. Her parents were gone. And so she thinks that was it at first. And, Archie the chef, they were always good friends. He would come and see her every day while she was in the bed. He would say to her, you can get better. I know you can get better. He would always give her these pep talks. She would just be laying there until one time he said to her, you got to get better so you can try to find your son. And that was all she needed. So then she slowly started moving and then she would get up in the middle of the night, walk around, and again, she could talk, but she would do all this stuff in the middle of the night so nobody would know, not her beloved sister. And also in this letter, she tells Kit that she's so glad she had time with her grandchild. Another twist. What the hell is going on? We find out that Jessie, the maid, was her granddaughter. So what happened was Jessie was living with Miss Baker and Virginia's son. She ends up applying for the job to be the maid at Hope's Inn because she finds out about Virginia and she wants to go meet her. She goes there and she ends up telling Virginia that her dad lived a great life and all this stuff, but that he did pass away. So she unfortunately was never reunited with her son, but she did get to meet Jessie. And then it was also a thing where Jessie was recording these secret messages to Virginia on these tapes and they were like communicating to each other in secret at night and everything. They were making a plan to get Virginia out of the house. It was just so much. And so they always ended up having something come up to where they couldn't get her out. One of the things was that Mary disappeared, aka was murdered. And the whole thing was that Kit's dad, Patrick, was the one that killed her because Mary came to him and was like, look, I need your blood so I can find out if you're the father of Carter and Virginia's baby. And he don't want that because he's a murderer. And he just don't want this out there. So he tells her, I'll come there and give you the blood. And she's like, okay. I don't know why, Lord, why. They should have met at a mutual location, but she agreed. He shows up and he pushes her off the cliff. So that's how she died. And then the other thing was that after Mary disappeared, they hired Kit. So then also she had a hard time trying to get away. So then when Virginia was living with Kit in the old age, Jessie just showed up one day and taps on the window. Was like, it's time to go, Grandma. And that's when she left. So then Virginia tells her that she's had this fabulous life in Europe. She's been living in Paris and all these places. She's become like a celebrity because people found out that she was not guilty of the murders of her family, because after the house fell off the cliff, you know, the police came and everything, and they found out all that happened and that she wasn't guilty and all that. And, you know, she's like been doing talk shows and all this stuff. And so inside this letter that she sent to Kit, she left 2 plane tickets to Paris. And I was like, 2? It's just Kit. But she left one for Kit and Archie. So Kit, and I'm assuming Archie, join her in Europe. And so in the very last page of the book, we get an excerpt, I believe, from a newspaper article or something, but it says Virginia Hope dead at age 101. It says at the very end, Hope is survived by her granddaughter, Jessica Oxford, the maid, and her husband, Robert, her great-granddaughter, Mary Hope Oxford, named after Mary the caregiver, and her devoted friend, caregiver, and traveling companion, Kittredge McDear. And so you have the only one left. Now, I did this book as a buddy read with Kasha from Kasha's Book Cemetery, and that just made this so much more fun because we were, you know, chit-chatting back and forth with our theories and everything, and it was just so fun to try to figure this out along the way. And I mean, if you can't tell by the way I was talking about it, I loved it! Loved it. This that I hold in my hand is my copy. I had to own it. I read it on my Kindle at the time, but I had to get me a copy. This is my favorite Riley Sager book so far. This was just everything for me. Like I said, I love the gothic atmosphere, the setting of the Hope's Inn house, all the characters, the drama, the family drama. It's just all the twists. Like I said, I only guessed 2. I guessed that Lenore, aka Virginia, had a baby, and I guessed that it was Kit's mom who was the patient that she was caring for. Yeah, so other than that, I did not see all this other stuff coming, and I mean, like I said, jaw was dropped open. And again, if you can make me emotional in a story, I'm always going to give it at least 4 stars, but this one was 5 stars. There were 2 times I got teary-eyed. I got teary-eyed when like I said, they took her baby from her, and also when we were reading a portion of the letter that she wrote to Kit, and she said, I guess you're wondering why I never left Hope's Inn, and one of the reasons she said was because she always hoped her son would come looking for her, and she wanted to be there. I just love this so much. So I hope Riley Sager can continue in this vein. This was up there with Lock Every Door, but again, this is my new favorite one of his. Lock Every Door will be number 2. And I have done a ranking, so you can check out my ranking video here. I don't think the order of the other ones have changed. I'm currently listening to Home Before Dark, and I still think that one is in the middle for me. But yeah, love this. This is also now one of my favorites of the year. I don't see anything topping this. I think it's definitely in the top 5 of the year, but we shall see. We shall see. So yeah, that is the spoiler review of The Only One Left by Riley Sager. Now, please let me know in the comments below if you've read this book, and if so, what you think. I can't wait to hear. Again, loved it. I know you're probably surprised. Let me know if you're surprised. I'm curious because I'm surprised. But again, when I started reading the sample, I just knew this was up my alley. I already knew it. I didn't know what I was going to get twists and turns wise, but I just felt like the writing at least was a start. So yes, I will have this book linked below, as well as ways you can support my channel. You can always donate towards coffee, tea, books. For those of you who have donated, thank you. You helped me to purchase this book that I will treasure forever. And of course, if you don't have a comment, but you want to show me some love, and or you want to let me know that you made it this far in the video, you can leave me a house emoji, because we have the house here on the cover for Hope's End. And I think that is it for this video, my beautiful people. So until next time, snuggle up in your hottie with a good book like The Only One Left. Unplug as much as possible. Be kind to all kind. And I will see you in the next video. Bye.